Welcome early arrivers. You've been listening to a piano solo, Stars by George Winston on YouTube. It's 4 p.m. Welcome all. It's wonderful to see mostly familiar, and new faces. By the way, we're recording each of the 6 units, except for the conversations in the breakout rooms. Information on where to watch the recordings is at the Eventbrite link you use to register. Before we formally begin, instead of asking you to put away any cell phones, as always, I ask you to keep them out so you can take a picture of any slide with information of particular interest, especially during the talks. There's some good slides. In the one poll today, with its partial list of ways to be engaged in support of group climate action, that's another one worth capturing in a photo. Thank you for coming. My name is Phil Coonley, a member of both 350 Mass Metronorth Node and of the Winchester Unitarian Society Green Sanctuary Committee, the groups which developed this seminar. These 2 organizations were joined in promoting the event by the 8 other organizations listed. The best change organizations are those anxious to collaborate in achieving a common goal. These are among them. Thanks also to the individuals who organized this event or facilitated its production. Everyone involved has done more than we realized would be needed. And especially thanks to James Chung, our patient and skilled Zoom producer, has made every production easier than the last. And as planned, will after today return focus to his freshman year at college. Our realistic goal is connection rather than perfection. And finally, the entire team offers special appreciation to our 9 fabulous speakers. If you watch the recording of Unit 1, you will have seen a brief summary of Mark, Ken, and Cora's action recommendations in our pre-unit show. Our poll is again anonymous, but this time seeks multiple answers. It explores the group action side of engagement. Next week, we'll have one poll too, but it will be focused on exploring our policy preferences to cope with the climate crisis and speed its reversal. Now let's do today's poll. I'm not sure I told James, it's the last one on the list. Thanks. It's multiple answer, anonymous.
It's displaying the results of the poll, at least mine is, rather than the poll itself. There you go. I think we saw it briefly, but I think it's wrong again.
Well, we're going to end the polls. Wow. There, there are fewer people getting involved in the nuts and bolts of those groups than there are in their core activities. Interesting. The administrative side isn't popular. In research, isn't as popular, or isn't something people see their role in. Cora really got initiated in her mother's out front through research. Thank you. Take a picture of that. Thank you for those who entered the poll. As always, our program today begins with a video from Climate Solution 101 series. Today it's the fourth one, Supporting Sinks and Improving Society. We'll then all meet in small breakout rooms to share our thoughts. After a brief report from each group via chat, we will have the pleasure of listening to today's speakers from Mass 350's Metronorth node, Alan Field, Ingrid Geis, and Roger Rosen. We will collect your questions in chat throughout their talks and leave time for answers after they're finished. All three of them are finished talking. Then we'll wrap up by 5:30 with a preview of next week's program and a request for some feedback from you. The Zoom site will stay open for another 15 minutes for a short music video and for those wanting to ask or give information. Okay, now for the screening of Drawdown video, Supporting Sinks and Improving Society. It's only 14 minutes.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about how we can address climate change by looking at the sinks of greenhouse gases and also how changes in society can have secondary benefits to climate change. As we think about these issues, one of the best places to begin is supporting nature's carbon cycle. These are things that are naturally sinks of greenhouse gases today. If we zoom in here, we can see how forests and oceans are absorbing over 40% of the pollution we put in the atmosphere every year. Most of that in the form of CO2. And so if we can support those sinks and make sure they stay healthy, that would help us address climate change into the future. But the problem is some of these systems aren't that healthy right now. A lot of our forests are feeling the weight of climate change already, or are being torn down. And our oceans are getting warmer and more acidic, and they're also getting more polluted and over-harvested at the same time. So job number one here is just kind of support nature, give it some backup, and make sure that it isn't diminishing these sinks we already have. Later, hopefully we can augment those sinks by putting other land and other ocean systems into production and add to what nature's doing already. But here's the math we got to start with. 100% of these emissions are coming from us. Land is putting out about 24% or removing it and putting it into our forest. The oceans are pulling out about 17% of the greenhouse gases and putting it into different parts of the ocean. Interestingly, even though oceans cover a lot more of the Earth's surface, they actually take up less of the carbon than land does. Oceans are important, but forests are kind of a big story here. Altogether, that still leaves about 59% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so this is part of the solution, but it can't be the whole solution. And before we look at the individual sinks, there are about 4 major points I think we have to talk about before we even get started. First of all, it is crucial that we give nature support because nature is already doing 40% of all the removal, and we're doing zip. So starting with backing up nature, giving it support, and making sure we don't lose that service of removing greenhouse gases is crucial. Then once we kind of get that stuff secured, we can also maybe add some of our own new carbon sinks, like planting new trees or farming new areas in different ways, or maybe machines that pull carbon out of the atmosphere, all of that. But first, why don't we help out nature that's doing a good job already? The second thing to remember is sinks all have limits. They can't take an infinite amount of greenhouse gas out of the atmosphere. There's no way. Trees only get so big. Soils only go so deep and can have so much carbon in them. Coral reefs can only grow so fast. So we have things that have a limited capacity to absorb our greenhouse gases. That's why it's probably more important to stop them before they ever get in the atmosphere than try to remove them later. And that leads to a third point. Sinks take time to absorb greenhouse gases. If you put out a ton of CO2 today and plant trees to offset that, it might take 100 years for those trees to grow fully to maturity, absorbing carbon out of the atmosphere. But in the meantime, you've got 100 years of climate change caused by the pollution you started with. So you can't really get away with this. By planting trees to offset emissions introduces a time lag where climate change is just going to be worse. There's kind of an asymmetry here. Turning off a power plant stops pollution today. Planting trees or building coral reefs or whatever basically is a solution for 50 to 100 years from now. The other thing we have to worry about is sinks may not always be permanent. They might not be secure. For example, some of our sinks are biological in nature, growing a new tree, putting stuff in the soil, putting stuff in a kelp forest or whatever. Those are biological sinks and they're great, but they can also be reversed. We can plant trees and then they can be burned down. We could farm really well and build up the soil, but that farmer retires, the next one comes in and plows it all up and it goes back in the atmosphere instantly. So these kind of biological sinks can sometimes be quite ephemeral. They may not be permanent. But some sinks might be more geological in nature. If we can lock up carbon in kind of like a rock or something like a coral reef or down in the basalt or something like that, then we got something that's locked up pretty much permanently, at least on human timescales. So let's look at these sinks one by one. On land, again, it takes up about 1/4 of our emissions, which is pretty amazing. And it's doing it with photosynthesis. The natural vegetation of our planet, especially trees, are growing a little bit faster now, and they're accumulating more biomass, or essentially wood. And when those things die, they build up a little more carbon in the soil, what we call soil organic matter. So photosynthesis, biomass of the living stuff, and soil organic matter, that's where all the carbon goes. And we can help maintain those sinks in nature by leaving nature alone. We can first take pressure off of nature by not clearing forest, for example. And that's where food waste and diets and things like that, where we don't need to grow more food and invade those forests because we're more efficient with the food we already grow. That'll be crucial. But also putting up kind of big protections around the remaining rainforest and peatland forest and other ecosystems to make sure they're never cleared at all. And then once we've kind of taken care of nature and secured it, then we can do exciting things like putting our farmland into new types of agriculture that might absorb carbon, what we often call regenerative agriculture. So we looked at these solutions. We looked at food waste and diets, not by just reducing emissions, but preserving sinks. We looked at how protecting forests didn't just reduce the deforestation emissions, it kept the forest sinks intact too. And then we looked at how changing agriculture and degrading lands back into production and reversing that can be really important as well. One of the things I want to mention, though, is regenerative agriculture is getting a lot of attention these days. This idea that farms and ranches could be farmed differently to absorb carbon. That is true. There's a lot of great evidence showing that we can grow crops and livestock in ways that can actually absorb carbon, whether in trees, in the forested areas around the farmland, or in agroforestry, or in the soil itself. And that's really exciting. But there are limits to how much this can happen. There's only much soil they can build up, there are only so many trees you can build up, and they are all kind of temporary. The next farmer or a drought or a fire could disturb all of them, putting them back in the atmosphere. So be careful there. There's also a few groups that are not really paying attention to the science, I would say, that are making big, bold claims that regenerative agriculture can absorb all of our greenhouse gas pollution. That is just not true at all. The scientific community is quite clear that it is a solution, but it's one of many solutions, and we've got to make sure we balance it with all the others. So when we look at the numbers, we see that protecting ecosystems and reducing food waste, kind of protecting and taking the pressure off of ecosystems is critical here to preserving sinks. And then we can put the farmlands and the degraded lands into better systems of agriculture so they absorb carbon too. So this combination of kind of taking pressure off of land, protecting it, and then farming our working lands in different ways can be powerful ways to maintain and enhance land-based carbon sinks. The oceans are kind of different. We don't manage the oceans as much as we might on land. A lot of it's out in the open ocean where we don't do so much. Coastal oceans are another matter, though. But either way, oceans as a whole, even though they take 71% of the planet, absorb 17% of our greenhouse gas emissions. And they do it through three major mechanisms. One is what we call a solubility pump. That's just a fancy way of saying CO2 dissolves in water. And what's interesting here is that salt water dissolves CO2 just like fresh water does. But as water warms up, it absorbs a little less CO2 than cold water. So as the climate changes, we can't really expect the solubility pump to get bigger. It's probably going to stay where it is or maybe go down a little. Then we have something called the carbonate pump, which is where living animals pull carbon dioxide and calcium out of the seawater, and they use it to build a shell. Our shellfish, things like oysters and clams and mussels, but also crabs and lobsters. They pull that stuff out of the water and build shells that stay there for quite a long time. Corals are the same thing too. Remember, corals are animals. They're not plants, they're not rocks. They're little polyp animals that build a calcium carbonate shell around them that we call a coral reef. And that takes CO2 out of the water as well. And then we finally have the biological pump, which is just basically the plants of the ocean. The little tiny microscopic phytoplankton and diatoms that do photosynthesis, as well as what we call macrophytes, or big plants, like kelp forest. They do photosynthesis, they build bigger plants, and those plants will later die and get buried in the ocean's sediment. So all of those things, whether it's just chemistry, building shells, or growing plants, pull carbon out of the air, through the water, and tuck it away. We can do a little bit to help already, obviously. For example, protecting the coastal ecosystems from being developed or torn apart, like mangroves and wetlands and marshes are critical carbon sinks. But also, they turn out to be really helpful in protecting our storm surges on the coastline. When we have healthy mangroves and coral reefs and marshlands and wetlands along the coast, we don't have as much flooding or as much damage from storms. So it kind of helps us prevent climate change, but also adapt the climate changes already here. That's a good win-win in my book. But we might also be able to add new carbon sinks out in the ocean, maybe through farming kelp in big regenerative aquaculture systems, or maybe planting new coral reefs and oyster beds and lots of other things. We're just beginning to explore the possibilities here, and I think they're going to be really cool. So we looked at land and oceans, but then we could look to machines to maybe become carbon sinks. There are machines out there, kind of in laboratory settings and a few very small pilots. The atmosphere is not noticing these things at all yet. They're way too small. But the idea here is maybe we could build machines that would pull carbon out of the atmosphere and either store it down in the rocks somewhere or tuck it away and lock it up, or use it for something. That's the one that gets me really excited. If we could pull carbon out of the atmosphere as carbon dioxide or whatever, and use it to make plastics or jet fuel or other things society might want without using oil at all. Use pollution to make our stuff, not new oil. Leave the oil in the ground, we'll take the old stuff out of the air. That would be really cool. This is nowhere near being deployable right now, but some of these technologies are very interesting, and over the next 10 years or so, I think we're going to see a lot more rapid development of these technologies, and they may start to play an important role. So we've looked at the carbon sinks, and before that, the carbon sources. And we can see by reducing pollution, working with nature, and maybe augmenting nature, we've got a lot we can do about climate change. But there's a third principle too, that improving society, not because of climate change, but because it's the right and moral thing to do, turns out to be a great set of climate solutions. It's kind of interesting. And turns out improving equality and equity, especially with women and girls, for example, improving the access to education and healthcare helps women and girls see new opportunities around the world. And as a consequence, women and girls will have maybe fewer children, but healthier children a little bit later in life than they might have otherwise had. And when that's the case, the growth of population in the future might bend down earlier than we thought before. While population growth actually isn't really responsible for most of climate change, most of the emissions are from rich people, not poor people. Future population growth slowing down will actually help us a little bit in the long run as population growth and economic development drive up emissions in the future. So this is a great win-win. By helping women have new opportunities, we might actually help the environment and the climate as well. So it turns out that helping people, for lots of good reasons, actually can help us with climate change as well. And this represents kind of a win-win opportunity to improve human well-being as well as improving our future climate solutions.
To explore what we just saw, you've been randomly assigned to small group breakout rooms. In the breakout rooms, same as every week, you're gonna have these guidelines. Be sure everybody has an opportunity to speak and be heard. Try both and thinking. More than one reality or perspective can be true at the same time. And 3, know what others have said and build on each other's ideas. Once all of you, usually 4, are in the breakout room, please first introduce yourself to your group and include why you're here today. Then discuss the question, what stood out most for you in the video? After you return from the breakout rooms, please send to everyone in the chat either your group's consensus view, we felt, or your own view, I felt. You'll be in the breakout rooms about 10 minutes and get a time reminder after 5 minutes and a countdown for the last minute. When you see the invite, please join your breakout room.
Phil, you need to unmute.
Thank you. Well, I was just telling everybody to put their ideas in the chat, but most people are doing it. That's great. Right. In my group, there are several people who are surprised that the ocean didn't absorb more than the 20% that it was absorbing now. And I was one who never realized that a coral reef wasn't there just to protect all the creatures that live there, but it was really turning CO2 into almost like rock that was really a great storehouse for CO2. I never kind of thought of that obvious link between the sink and coral. People like win-win things. They really like the idea of the coastal management for in terms of mangrove swamps and marsh protection. And they thought that was something that would probably get some funding early on, since it was both a way to deal with the increasing threat from climate change, as well as to actually increase the sink. Well, we have three speakers today, and they all have lots to say. So we're going to move on to the speakers. And just a second. Oops, nope. Sorry. I'm going to start with Alan Field. It's my honor to introduce three speakers from Metronorth node. Alan Field supports all the various efforts of the 350 Metronorth group, but has the past few years especially focused on passing state legislation. For example, the Next Generation Roadmap legislation that became law in March 2021, very important achievement thanks to the hard work of 350 Mass and the other groups, many other groups. Mass, here he is. He also likes to collaborate with other groups in Winchester and nearby towns and encourages a sharing of information across climate groups. Alan, it's all yours.
I'm still waiting for the screen sharing option. Here we go. Okay, I believe you see something on the screen, a bunch of people. Actually, these people spell three numbers. There's a 3, a 5, and a 0. This was actually in 2010 in Winchester. At that time, we didn't have a local 350 organization in town here, but this was relating to the international and national 350.org. Started by Bill McKibben. So anyway, that's just a little introductory picture. And I see, actually, I think this person right here is our dear host, Phil. Today, the three of us are not going to talk so much about sinks, I believe, as some other things, although some of us in our local group are definitely very interested in sinks and focused on sinks of various kinds, including myself, especially for me in terms of forest in Massachusetts. I will talk, what I want to talk about is what our local 350 group is. We call them nodes, but they're our local group, 350 Mass nodes. What our local group is, and then separately, I want to talk a little bit about legislation that we do, which happens to be one of my interests. So, 1 second. There are lots of organizations, and I think the message here is you don't have to join 350, but it'd be generally useful to join some organization. In fact, I suspect a lot of you are, based on that poll. I think a lot of you are familiar with some of this stuff. But Elders Climate Action is a national organization, but it has a Massachusetts chapter, which is in fact where it began. And they do excellent work, and they're a great organization to be part of. Similarly, Massachusetts Sierra Club, Mothers Out Front, very active. Then if you're more local, like if you live in Lexington, Lexington Climate Action is a great group to get involved in. You can engage yourself. And we have in Winchester, we've got our Cool Winchester, Sustainable Winchester, 350 Mass. So it's good to connect with one of these groups. Okay, yeah, on that previous side, just there are more than 100 organizations like this in Massachusetts operating. So there's actually a really large voice collectively if we participate in one of these organizations or even act individually. So in 350 Mass, the group that we're part of, it's got 18 local chapters, or as we call them, nodes, across Massachusetts. And we are one of those chapters. We got started actually in 2016. Our group's called Metronorth. Got started in 2016, right after the election that motivated us to take a little more action than we had been previously. And it's a fantastic group. I love it. We've got about 17 active members in it, that they're from about 8 towns nearby. We started in Winchester, we kind of spread out a bit after that. We meet on alternate Wednesdays at noon, and our meetings are very engaged, active, and they're busy meetings. So what do we do with our group? I would say one way to look at it is we educate and we act. We educate ourselves and we educate others, and we take all kinds of actions. And Ingrid and Roger are going to talk about some kinds of actions we do, and I will also talk about legislative actions. Let me see what the next picture is. Okay, this is an example of our meeting. That's typically about the size of our meeting, and we've got really regular people who come to these meetings. What do we talk about in our meetings? Well, we have our agenda, but aside from that, on various meetings, we sometimes will talk about nuclear power, about forests, about biochar, renewable energy, corporate polluters, state agencies, environmental justice, economics, all kinds of things. Okay. One thing I just want to point out here is, Roger's going to talk about direct action, but I couldn't resist putting a slide in here. It's an example of some of the creativity that comes out of people in a group. Somebody in our group worked on nice rhymes. It is dire, West on fire, and so on. Some people worked on actually making the signs. We actually had musicians who performed when we were holding the signs. So there's all kinds of ways that different people in a group can apply their skills and interests. And this particular event we did on the side of the road in Reading a couple of times, and where Rep Jones is the rep there. And a lot of people were very positive, honking the horns and waving and stuff. And it was nice to get out, even though it was during the pandemic. It was nice to get out and take an action like this. We really enjoyed it. Okay. So that's just a brief touch on what our local organization is. And I want to now talk about the state legislation issues, which is what I and another member of our group, Christine and I, are representatives on the state legislative team, which works on state legislation. So this team, the state legislative team of 350 that we are on, it works on creating and endorsing and promoting bills, legislation in the state of Massachusetts. So first step is creating bills. Sometimes 350 works on creating its own bills. Like, for example, there's one in recent months that we created, which we affectionately called Cash for Clunkers. It was about getting highly polluting vehicles off the road. Many of the bills are not by ours, but are from other organizations. We're part of a coalition of many groups. This picture points out some of them, especially the one in the middle here, Mass Power Forward, has about 100 groups in Massachusetts that are members of it. And so we have an enormous collective voice, even though we do our individual things, but collectively we're quite powerful. Here, for example, Elders Climate Action t-shirt there, Mothers Out Front, Toxics Action Center, MCAN, lots of different organizations. And we work together under the umbrella of Mass Power Forward, and there are other coalitions as well. Okay, all right, so I want to talk about legislation. Once we've decided what legislation we might want to create, we work on it, we get descriptions of it, and we eventually want to get politicians to sponsor them. So just to point out, don't bother trying to read all this because it's too much to read and it's distracting. But we have currently going, and we're sort of at the tail end of the process now, our legislative agenda for 2021 to 2022. So we have 2-year legislative sessions. And we have 11, this is the top half of the first page of our legislative agenda priorities. We have 11 priorities that we settled on. Now, the one I mentioned, cash for clunkers, that's actually down here. It's called retiring high emission vehicles. But I'd just like to mention the first one, just as an example. Buildings and housing are a major issue in terms of emissions in Massachusetts. One of the, maybe the three biggest areas, buildings, transportation, and electricity generation. So anyway, a bill that we and others have been supporting is called Building Justice with Jobs. It has representatives who are sponsoring it, and it has a senator who's sponsoring it. And the goal of this bill, in one sentence or less, is to retrofit 1 million homes in this decade with zero emission heating, cooling, and appliances. Now, when we have a bill like this, for our 11 bills, we also have a one-page, more detailed description. So this is the Building Justice with Jobs description. And it gives the more details about what is in this bill. Reading the bill itself is actually pretty difficult, so it's nice to read something that summarizes it. Again, don't try to read all that. But the point is that we create the bills, we try to have materials that can communicate what's in the bills that we then can share with others, and then those other people can take action with that information. So once we've got our bill set, how do we get representatives and senators to sponsor it? And how do we get it to pass? So part of this gets us, prior to the pandemic, it got us out to the State House. Since then, we've been doing it more virtually. But so, for example, here is at the State House steps. We have sometimes events out of doors, publicizing issues. Sometimes we're indoors. This is a picture of a hearing room. On the back, on the right-hand side here, are the senators and representatives on this panel, on this subcommittee. And in front, over a little bit here on the left, you can see this, are some people who are actually there speaking on a particular bill to this committee. And the rest of the room is the general public observing, or people who are waiting to also speak to the committee. So that's one way to try to have influence and have pressure on getting bills developed and passed. Sometimes we have lobby days. This picture is from a lobby day where there's not only 350 Mass people, but other environmental groups. And this is a room where we're collecting, where we leave our coats and gather between activities. And the activities are often going to the offices of our representatives and senators. Sometimes we just have a little fun. This is people from Winchester, and we're in some politician's room there, their office, I'm not sure which one. And we get to talk with our senators and our representatives. This is Pat Jalen, who happens to represent my precinct. And doing this it's really interesting. It's open to anyone in Massachusetts. You know, this is democracy in action, where we can actually meet our representatives and try to influence them and tell them what we think and why we care. However, there are other people also running around the State House trying to influence people. And look what these people have. Look in terms of the money. We've got utility companies like National Grid and Eversource. We've got fossil fuel companies like Exxon. We've got various real estate organizations. And look at the bills that they are opposing and the amount of money they're spending on their lobbying. So we are badly outspent by professional lobbyists, by special interest lobbyists. However, we have more voices than they do. So that's the tug of war between the voices and the dollars in some sense. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about something called the Next Generation Bill. This is an example of a bill in the previous legislative session that we were developing and working on, and it finally came to fruition at the end of 2020, but Baker vetoed it, but it got revised some more. It's actually, the bill is a compilation of a whole lot of other bills that people were interested in, put into one. But anyway, finally, a year ago, in March 2021, it was passed and signed by the governor because he knew his veto would be overridden. And it is now the law. And that was a fantastic victory for all of us who were working so hard for so long trying to get these climate issues addressed. The next generation bill called for emissions reductions for buildings, transportation, energy generation, and much more. So something about the next generation roadmap, it called for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. That term net zero greenhouse gas emissions is a tricky one, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. What I'd like to, just to illustrate one piece of the next generation bill law now, was within it, there was something called the net zero energy stretch code. The idea behind this was that we have building codes and we have stretch building codes, but we need a more advanced building code where it's no longer emitting, the building is no longer emitting any emissions. And so that would be a net zero building code for those buildings. And it required that the Department of Energy Resources develop a new net zero energy stretch code. Well, they've been doing that, and they've been holding hearings around the country about their suggested net zero code. And the problem with it is it still allows for the installation of fossil fuel equipment in new construction. Now, for some of us, this is totally unacceptable. How can we possibly achieve our 2050 goals if we are contemplating building new and long-lasting equipment that's burning fossil fuels? This just does not sit well. So one of the things we can do about that is we can comment to the Department of Energy Resources. We can send them letters. This is a letter we wrote with our own, our local 350 Metronorth node. It's in different organizations all over the state were writing their own letters, or they were using various kinds of form letters to express their dissatisfaction with the net zero energy code. That's it's a municipal opt-in energy code. So it's the municipalities have to decide they want to choose it before it actually becomes in effect. So that's what I have to say. I don't know how long it took, but I hope that gave you a little glimpse of our local group, which is a wonderful group, but there's lots of great groups around. Also, I hope that gives you a glimpse of how some of the legislative work goes. And if you need to contact us, this email address, pretty easy to remember, 350 Metronorth. If you have any questions you want to follow up for any of us on this event. So thank you. I'm going to give the screen back to everybody else.
Thank you, Alan. And you're reminding me, I should have asked everybody to use the chat to put in questions you have for Alan, and now for Ingrid, and later for Roger. And then after they've all spoken, we'll take those questions and see who's, and let them answer. Ingrid Geis has been a Winchester resident for the last 24 years, serves on the Winchester Public Library Board of Trustees, and worked on the town's 2011 and 2020 climate action plans. In 2018, she led a team that got disposable plastic bags banned in Winchester. She joined 350 Mass in 2016. It's been a member of its state steering team since 2017. In 2021, she founded Stop and Steer the Money, a 350 Mass working group which engages in a host of actions concerning climate and finance. Ingrid.
Thank you, Phil. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes, beautiful.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil. Bill McKibben said that the question that he's asked the most is, when it comes to climate change, what can I do as an individual? And Bill's answer is stop being an individual. And as Alan said earlier, the message is don't go it alone, join an organization. I can tell you from my personal experience, it will energize you. So why are we talking about money today? Whoops, and I'm unable to move to my next slide. Hold on one moment. I'm the last dinosaur on the earth and I need my consultant here to help me. So this, okay. Why are we talking about money? Well, money enables climate change. We've got banks who are lending to fossil fuel companies so that they can build their pipelines and their gas compressors. These banks are also lending to consumer product companies who are often involved in deforestation, and some are involved in deforestation of old growth forests. We've got pension funds and asset managers, sometimes referred to as investment managers. These folks are investing in those very same companies. And they're investing for us because we've got pensions and we've got 401k plans. So the three largest investment managers in our country are BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street. And State Street's headquarters are actually right here in Boston. These companies are very large and very powerful. They hold our shares, you know, if we've got mutual funds, they hold our shares. And just as importantly is that they engage in proxy voting. Every year in the springtime during corporate annual meetings, they vote on our behalf to get directors on the boards of these companies, get directors off the boards of these companies. It's estimated that these three firms alone account for 25% of all corporate director voting in our country every year. So they are very, very powerful. And then you've got insurance companies, which are the companies that insure all of those pipelines and gas compressors. And the largest insurer of the fossil fuel industry is Liberty Mutual. And once again, their headquarters are based in Boston. Here you can see the largest banks, or the banks that do the most fossil fuel lending. Important to note that Chase is out here way ahead of all the rest. Chase has really been aggressively expanding in our state over the last few years. Bank of America and Citi are also present in Massachusetts. And obviously these are very big banks. They've got lots of money. They've got huge marketing departments. And with the huge marketing departments comes the ability to greenwash. This is making yourself look better than you actually are. So I'll just give you an example. Chase Bank is a member of something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So if you knew nothing else, about Chase, you'd think, oh, okay, well, they get it. Good for them. They're doing good stuff. But the chart here shows us not really the case. So the message is you can listen to what they're saying, but it's more important to watch what they're doing because they're usually not one and the same thing. So we started this little working group called Stop and Steer the Money. And I want to talk to you just a little bit about the Stop the Money universe. There are a number of, many actually organizations that populate this universe. And I want to introduce you to three if you don't already know them. All three of these are national organizations. So Stop the Money Pipeline does these really great actionars. If you've never heard that word actionar, this is what it is. It's basically a webinar. And usually at the end of the webinar, say in the last 10 or 15 minutes, they ask folks to take on an action. So a while back, Stop the Money Pipeline held an actionar and asked folks like you and me to, at the end of the webinar, contact the management of the top 3 investment firms. Remember, we talked about those before, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, to contact them and tell them, we want Lee Raymond off the board of Chase. And wonderful that this campaign was actually successful and Lee Raymond is off the board. Also important to know that before Lee Raymond joined the board of Chase, he worked at ExxonMobil for about 30 years. That was during the time period when ExxonMobil knew that it was contributing to climate change. And the way they thought they would deal with that was to spend a lot of money on a climate denial campaign. So if this is the type of thing that you're interested in, shareholder season's coming up again in the spring. I know that Stop the Money Pipeline has got a few action Rs set up, I think, for April and May. So check it out. Similarly, BlackRock's a big problem. This organization really kind of calls out BlackRock and more recently Vanguard on their greenwashing, which is kind of helpful because it's not always so easy to know what's greenwashing. And so at least they can help you a little bit on telling you when, what a company is saying is not in fact the truth. And then lastly, there's Third Act, which was started by Bill McKibben. Third Act is targeting the boomer generation and the silent generation, which I learned just recently is the generation that precedes the boomers. Why are they targeting those 2 groups? Because those 2 groups own 70% of all financial assets in the United States. So we are not only many, as Alan says, we are powerful and we should use our leverage. And Third Act is basically asking people to go online and sign a pledge. If you happen to be banking with Bank of America, Chase, Citibank, or Wells Fargo, which we saw earlier, are not great banks when it comes to fossil fuel lending, you're taking a pledge to say, okay, if these guys don't really start changing what they're doing in a meaningful way in the next year, we are going to leave their banks. So those are 3 examples of the Stop the Money universe. Our little working group has really so far only been in existence about 6 months. We're focusing more on steer the money. What do we mean by steer the money? Basically, don't put the money in the pipelines, put it instead into green infrastructure, like greening the grid, electrifying transit, electrifying buildings, and also channel the money towards financial institutions whose activities kind of better align with our values. So there is a bill currently still alive in the Massachusetts legislature. Let me go back. One of the examples of what you can do if you're steering the money is to advocate for funding for our state so that it can continue with its decarbonization plan. So now one of the bills that's currently still in the Massachusetts legislature is H3292. I apologize that I didn't put in the name of it, but the shortened name for it is the Green Future Act. And the Green Future Act calls for a price on carbon and also for the ability of our state to issue green bonds. The combination of the revenues that would come from a carbon price and the ability to issue bonds would allow us to fund all of these green infrastructure projects that we're hoping to do. And a fun activity that our group did earlier in the year was we got together with Climate Exchange, which is another environmental organization, and we wrote postcards, handwritten postcards that went to voters all around Massachusetts, but particularly in districts, like I, for instance, was writing 50 postcards to Chelsea, asking voters to, first of all, support H3292, but then more importantly, for them to contact their legislators and get them to support 3292. So it was kind of a fun campaign, and especially in January when we were all inside again with COVID, it kind of made me feel like, okay, I'm doing something. Another example of steer the money is we can insist that our pensions or our 401k companies work with the companies that they are investing in to decarbonize. And I use this word decarbonize a lot. It basically goes back to what Alan said earlier. It's the goal to be net zero by 2050, what the Paris Climate Accords was asking for. So working with pensions, we actually hosted an action hour earlier in the year with Mary Cerulli of Climate Finance Action. And folks like you and me, again, we made our calls, we sent out emails, we tweeted to the board members of the Massachusetts Pension Fund, otherwise known as PRIM, to ask them to please vote in favor of these climate guidelines. And I won't go into the details because that takes up a lot of time. But the good news is that they have voted to, in fact, adopt the guidelines. And the thing to keep in mind is they are guidelines, not mandates at this point. But after all, we have to start somewhere. I put in the second bullet in the event that there's someone on this call today who's a Massachusetts teacher, current or retired, because the Massachusetts Teachers Association Climate Action Network works with teachers to work directly with the MA pension fund. So keep that in mind. And then the last way that you can steer the money, and this is something that our group has been working on. We've had a few very dedicated individuals pursuing this project, is to find better alternatives for banks. And the message here is, if you're looking for a better bank, think small, think local. Why? Because if the bank is small and local, there's a much smaller chance that they are going to be involved in the fossil fuel industry or the deforestation companies that we talked about earlier. And just as importantly, they are more likely to invest in your community to make it a better place to live, a stronger community, a more resilient community. And the documents you see here below the line is a framework that some of the individuals in Stop and Steer have put together. It provides you with a framework for what to look for if you're going to change banks and look for something better. So when Phil shares these slides, whenever this week, you'll be able to just click on those documents and see what they're suggesting. And there's also contact info there. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ingrid. Terrific. Wow, we have 3 speakers and they're all great and they all have a lot to say. And keep putting your questions in the chat, please. Roger Rosen has been an Arlington resident for the last 26 years and served on the Arlington Human Rights Commission. He's a member of Sustainable Arlington and joined 350 Mass in January 2019. He's on the planning team of Climate Courage, which is a direct action working group of 350 Mass, and also performs as a song leader at 350 Mass actions and events. He sings and plays the guitar in the 350's house band, Sing for the Climate. Starting this Tuesday, Roger is one of 6 members of 350 Mass who have announced their intention to commence a hunger strike to demand an immediate transition to clean energy in Massachusetts, and specifically beginning with an end to Project 2015A, which is a planned dirty oil gas peaker facility in Peabody. Decision makers at local, state, and federal levels are aware of this hunger strike and have the power to avert this, as even today, by ending this ill-conceived project. So he is a great example of climate courage himself. So Roger, please talk to us. We have to give him the ability to
Oh,
talk.
thank you. I couldn't unmute myself.
Right, okay.
The host needed to do that for me. Thank you, Phil. I'm just gonna keep track of my time here. Hi, everyone. As Phil said, I'm a member of the planning team for Climate Courage, which is the direct action working group of 350 Massachusetts. What is direct action? Strikes and protest marches are examples of direct action. And James, I've added a few words to my talk here, so please hold the video until I've introduced it. This is the 2014 People's Climate March in New York City. 400,000 people filled Central Park West and adjoining streets in Manhattan. It was one of the largest demonstrations in US history. In September 2019, there was a global student climate strike. In Boston, the strike began with a rally of between 10 and 15,000 people at City Hall Plaza and continued with a march to the State House. Here's a little video of that march. Go ahead, James, you can start that video. Thanks, James. You can go on to the next slide. As you can see from that video, and it was true of the Climate March in New York City too, some of these events are quite celebratory and fun to participate in. This photo of our first Chase Bank protest action in downtown Crossing appeared in the Boston Globe. It involved a little street theater, as you could see there by our clown. We've organized a number of protests at Chase Bank branches since then as part of the national campaign to pressure Chase Bank to divest from fossil fuels. We try to have a band or singing at our actions. Here in Newton Corner, we had a tuba player and a cornet player from a Boston honk band providing music. This makes the tone of the action more upbeat and celebratory and helps us attract more attention. Our actions sometimes have a theme. The theme at the Chase branch in Coolidge Corner was extinction. That Chase Bank, by funding climate chaos, is funding the 6th mass extinction that the planet is currently experiencing. Some of the things that make direct action powerful are its collective action. The reason that collective action is necessary is that at this point in the climate emergency, while individual actions like retrofitting your home to have a net zero carbon footprint or driving an electric vehicle are important, they will not move the needle in terms of preventing the climate disasters that we are trying to minimize or avoid. Collective action is required. Collective action builds courage. It builds solidarity. It reminds you that you are not doing this work alone, which is really helpful to those of us who are activists in the climate area. It's saying no to business as usual, and it's been a key part of every movement for social change. And I do put the climate movement in the category of movements for social change. Direct action is sometimes called disruptive mobilization, and it's one of two categories of movement building. The other is long-term base building. They overlap. Disruptive mobilization attracts public attention and changes what is politically possible. It can force people to face an issue. It can cause the people in power to change what they're doing. It often reaches people not reached before, who may not be aware of the issue you're raising. Disruptive mobilization can be designed to get in the way of everyday life and interrupt business as usual. Liberty Mutual is the largest insurer of the fossil fuel industry. On the October 29th day of action last fall, a large number of activists held a rally at Liberty Mutual's headquarters on Berkeley Street, and then marched to the Chase Bank branch at downtown Crossing. We filled the streets along the route of the march, and the Boston police had to reroute traffic. Sometimes, there we are at the downtown Crossing branch of Chase Bank. Sometimes, one of our climate heroes shows up for an action. That's Bill McKibben on the right. This was what we call a standout at the Weymouth compressor station last year. Several members of us, including Ingrid, that was Ingrid out front, were at that standout. And this was an action at the Chase branch in Woburn. This was one of a series of actions at the Chase branch in Wellesley, where we were joined by students from Natick High School. This was our most recent action in Danvers on February 2nd. We were protesting at a North Shore Chamber of Commerce breakfast, at which National Grid and Enbridge were the featured speakers. Enbridge is the Canadian oil and gas pipeline company responsible for the Weymouth compressor station and the infamous Line 3 tar sands oil pipeline, which was built across the sacred treaty lands of 4 different First Nations in northern Minnesota. I'll wind up with a few photos from that action. You can, yeah, thanks. And the next photo after this is the Red Rebel Brigade, which is affiliated with Extinction Rebellion. They come to lots of climate protests to bear witness to the preciousness of life on Earth. They dress in red to symbolize the lifeblood that connects all species and makes us one. So in closing, I'd like to read from the mission statement of the Red Rebel Brigade. We aspire to convey humility, compassion, sympathy, and understanding, and to illuminate the magical realm that exists beneath the surface of all things. We invite people to enter that realm, as it is the realm of the heart and our deepest connections to each other and all living beings. So that's an overview of Climate Courage, the direct action wing of 350 Massachusetts. Our next action will be a rally at the State House on March 16th to call for fixing our electrical grid so that it can include more wind and solar. And on March 17th through March 24th, there'll be a series of standouts to protest the construction of the Peabody Peaker plant that Phil was just telling us about, and in support of the hunger strikers. We hope you can join us at one of these events. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. There are a lot of questions. By the way, I saw Monty among the participants. Please put the link with the details to the March 16th, which is what, Wednesday, event on Boston Common in the chat, will you? Please, and I'll send something out to everybody who's participating in this so they'll be aware of it. But thank you very much. That's a big deal and very important. The first question is the same for everyone. And what moved you to become a climate activist? And we'll start with Roger. Excuse me, we'll start with Roger. Yeah, we'll go back to front here. What moved you, Roger?
So many things. I guess it starts with my 3 daughters and wanting the Earth to be continue to be a beautiful and livable place for them as they grow up. They're all young adults. And it also grows out of my love of nature, I think. I've spent, I took my daughters and my family to Acadia National Park for a week every summer as they were growing up, and we spent a week camping in the woods there. And we all feel very connected to the beauty of this planet. And that's really what motivates my climate activism.
Thank you. Ingrid?
I would agree with Roger. Family, I've got 2 sons, so I'm fighting for them. Nature, because it calms me and I love it. And when I was in high school, I was really into foreign languages and not so much into science. So I took the Science for Poets class, which happened to be on environmental science. And since then, I have never looked at things in the same way again. It always made me think about the environment, what we could do. So shout out to Mrs. Rubin at Port Washington, New York, Paul D. Schreiber High School.
Beautiful. And Alan?
Sure, I guess I would have to say that what really motivates me the most, and for a long time now, is just the incredible complexity of life on Earth. I mean, if you look, whether you're looking at a snail and how does a snail work, or a virus, or these amazingly complex but rather destructive human beings that we could have developed with such complexity is just astounding. And it took so incredibly long, and that we could now run the risk of trashing it in a very short period of time. So that just seems like it's an incredible shame to destroy something that's so absolutely remarkable.
Wow, you guys, very moving. Now we're going to get back to the bureaucratic questions. Alan, can you point to a summary of the Mass Roadmap Bill and its targets for greening of our electric grid by year? Where could we find out what we really need to achieve here?
I didn't realize I was going to have to answer that question.
Well,
Where
you
we
don't
can
have
get
to answer it. You're allowed
Yeah, I
to
guess
say.
I don't have a ready-made answer.
Right.
Where to get a summary of the roadmap goals?
Yes, and that really talks about the years in which we have to achieve X% of renewables.
Yeah, well, I would just get an off the cuff answer. I hate to say it, is that people say we don't have much time left. Well, in fact, we don't have any time left. We are already losing species, so we don't have time. The question now is, how do we limit how much damage there is? I don't have. If somebody emails our address, I can think of more ways to explain that. But yeah, it's.
You've just answered another question, which was, isn't carbon neutral by 2050 too late? But I think your answer was right on.
Actually, I could add, let me add to that if I could. And that is because it's just to keep in mind that, but there's these 2050 goals, like for example, with Drawdown, which we're sort of focusing on. If we by 2050 succeed in ceasing to emit our emissions, that'll be the peak of our emissions. Well, that means, that sounds good. We've peaked and now we can start going down. But it also means we're at the worst level of emissions of all time at that moment. So the moment of Drawdown is only the beginning. We have to go way down to get back to a healthy planet from that point. But it's still, it's a place it's a curve we have to go over to get there.
What I'd like to do now is something a little different, but I'd like to have Monty raise his hand through the reaction button so we can actually see it. So we can unmute you, because Roger spoke to your the March 16th direct action thing, and I'd like you to speak a little more about why that's important to be there. Can we unmute Monty? Yes. Can you, I don't know if they can see your hand. I can, but I can't ask you.
I can talk.
Okay, great.
The ISO New England is a nonprofit agency that is charged by the federal government with managing the electric grid that provides us with electricity. And in addition to just kind of distributing electricity where various people need it and things like that, they also decide year to year on which power stations, sources of power, provide the electricity that they will put out on the grid. And so far, they have resisted changing from natural gas created electricity to solar and wind power. And so we have been in a campaign to get public attention to the fact that they are not responding to climate change and are sticking with natural gas, which as more and more of us has found out, natural gas is actually methane put into a nice fancy bottle, but is actually quite harmful, pollutes the environment, and is also dangerous for just using it in your home. Just recently, ISO has decided that it's going to put off allowing a lot of solar and wind power to be established in New England so that we can begin the transition. They're going to put off that transition until 2025. And that just means that in 2025, they will allow people to bid to put their plants together. And since it takes perhaps 3 years for a plant to come online, to build the wind turbines and get the permits and get the financing, that means that there won't be any significant additions of solar or wind power to New England until 2028. Okay, and that is a really long time from now, I must say. And so there's a lot of outrage in New England about that. And we are having a rally on Wednesday afternoon in Boston to protest that and to give our version of a carbon-free future that we think ISO ought to be aiming for. We are supported by our state senators who are sending letters to the federal government complaining about what ISO is doing. And we are also supported by many state legislators, and we think the public in general supports solar and wind power becoming the way in which we power our state. So we believe that this rally is a good way to show that that we are going to change the way in which the electric grid works. It is also the first opportunity this spring to have a big demonstration downtown and say, the pandemic is over, stop going, no more are we going to be quiet, we're going to be here and we want you to do something about climate change. So come on out, and it's in the
Yeah, Monty, I put in the chat, I put a link to that in the chat, so if people want to sign up, it's there.
Okay, great. So you can sign up for it. If you sign up for it, you will get a packet that will give you information, including a set of directions for how to get downtown, either by automobile or commuter rail. If you live in Winchester, you can just take the commuter train down. So we think it's going to be a great event. We're going to have, Roger is actually going to sing. He'll be on his first day of his hunger strike, but he says that he will be not too hungry to sing and play his guitar. So we're going down to support Roger, and 5 other people from 350 Mass who are doing a hunger strike. There's going to be several people from the hunger strike who will be there, as well as Lydia, is that right? Yeah, Lydia Edwards, the newly elected state senator from Chelsea and East Boston. So,
Thank you, Monty.
Mhm.
We have another question, which I guess we'll give to Alan, since he was speaking to lobbying. And this is from Cyrus. He says, if I'm in several groups, does it look bad if my signature is on the petitions from several groups? Does it look like I'm voting too many times?
Well, no, I think it's great. More the merrier. People need to be exposed many times. The readers need to be exposed many times. And they won't. I don't think anyone would notice, frankly, that your signature is on more than one thing. So no, find as many different ways to get your voice heard as possible.
Thank you. Let me see. Regenerative organic landscape practices. Question is, are we going to give this some attention? I'm not sure that any of you, I think this is more of a wonderful, positive statement about it, but it's not really a question, sorry.
I feel like a comment. We have a member in our group who is interested in that issue, Valerie. In fact, I think she might even be here.
Yep, she is. Valerie, you want to weigh in on the healthy soils, nutrient density?
Well, I am not an expert at all, but I did share way early in the chat about a free week-long summit about it this coming week. If you saw that in the chat, and it's got some amazing speakers, and you'll probably be able to learn everything you want to know about it. I agree with the video we watched that it certainly isn't going to solve everything, but if talking about individual action, I know a little bit about it and try to do it in my own garden. And then I also have, I work at farming conference every year, and So I hear little bits and pieces of it. I take care of all their kids while they're at the conference. I host the children's conference, so I don't get to go to all of the workshops and hear everything from beginning to the end. That's why I'm not an expert. But you know, I think that there's a lot of excitement in the organic farming community, and I do believe that if you think about all the farmland in this country, and if we could somehow convert all of that to this type of farming, it really could. There's a lot of land out there. Of course, we're not going to do that, but you know, we can always dream. And I hope everybody can see the link, because I think it's totally all the experts in this field are going to be at that conference, at that soil regen summit. I hope you can find it in your chat. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you. We're gonna have, what we do now is we kind of close on time. We have a 2-minute music video, and then those who are interested can come back. So maybe somebody wants to know what Roger's family thinks of him going on a hunger strike, whatever. Come back after the music video. So I just want to say what's happening next. Thank you, speakers. Next week, we're looking forward when the Drawdown video will be the 9-minute putting it all together with guest speaker John Waukee, Director of Waterfront and Climate Justice Initiatives at Green Roots. He's going to discuss the disproportionate effects of climate change on Chelsea and similar urban communities and explain why both those living in or outside these communities can help, how you can do it. Since you registered for today's unit, you're already registered for all the units. I hope you'll be here and bring a friend, a colleague. Encourage them to prepare by watching the videos they haven't watched yet. Thank you, James, one more time. You really got us through the first 4 units, and you left us with a blueprint for the 5th and 6th. So anyone out there who might like to be the Zoom producer the next couple of weeks, please contact me, coonley@me.com. They keep saying thank you to me when something goes right, but it's never me. It's always been James. So we need another James. If you have feedback about today's unit, please put it in the chat as you listen to our music video. And for those with more questions, share them. We'll stick around. We'll be here till 5:45. Have a great week, folks.
We need to wake up. We need to wise up. We need to open our eyes and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We're on a planet that has a problem. We've got to solve it, get involved, and do it now, now, now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now. We need to build a better future, and we need to start right now.
So now we don't need to use the chat to ask a question. You can raise your hand. And one way to do that is when you look at the bottom of your screen, it says reactions. And you can raise your hand as one of your reactions. It's on the far right in the bottom of the screen. And any of this, there are several of us here who can, if you see somebody with a hand raised, call on them. I'll call on Valerie. I'll ask to unmute.
I just wanted to say that I did share a couple of the hunger strike dates with you folks, but I couldn't figure out how to share it with everybody. If you wanted to share those dates with everybody, I think there's still some details needed on one of them, but I think there's an email contact there that you can, if you're
Right.
interested.
Roger has done those. He sent it to everyone. Yes.
Oh, the hunger strike ones?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't
thank you.
see it. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Roseanne, I'm going to ask to unmute Roseanne.
Thank you, Phil. The question is, what's the name of the song that was just shared?
It's called Sing for the Climate.
Thank you, Roger.
And Roseanne, if you search in YouTube, you'll find at least a dozen different videos of people in Europe in town squares and various places singing in hundreds and thousands at a time that song, because it was used as a mobilizing tool for the 2015 Paris climate talks in Europe.
Great,
This
thank
is
you.
this is Belgium.
That's where it
Belgium
started.
thing.
Yeah.
Yes, this one. This is labeled it on the YouTube, but we include that information. We'll include that information. Maybe I can do it now. Who else has got a hand raised? Oh, Monty again. Oh, you've got your yellow hand against the yellow wall, but you're muted. I can't. Oh, here you go. Here you go. Sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to say, Roseanne and everybody else, if you'd like to sing that song with hundreds of people, come to the rally on Wednesday. Roger's going to lead us in that song. So it'll be your first chance to sing it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Was Linda raising her hand? Who else? Let me think.
Valerie.
Valerie's back. Okay, go ahead, Valerie. Oh, you left your hand up?
I just left it up. I'm so sorry. I'll unraise it here. So sorry. Yeah.
Okay, who's got a hand up that I'm missing? Well, we'll be on time for a change. Anyway, how do I, James, please put the spotlight.
Phil, Carol
Yes.
Zubek has a question.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'm just so excited about for many other reasons, that regenerative organic landscaping, it helps with replenishing water cycles, which is really important for a number of the renewable energy solutions. And it's also restores landscapes, which really helps with our mental health and also at the nutrient density. As more and more studies coming out proving that the healthier soils really helps improve nutrient density, which also will help us, give us energy to focus on the carbon. So it's a huge part of the solution. I agree totally. There is some greenwashing, and the carbon trading needs to be shifted a lot more over to the power of biodiversity.
Thank you very much. You know, one of no matter what you do, there has to be a manageable focus. And it could have been on one of the 80 things, or several of the 80 solutions that would actually get us, if all done together, get us to Drawdown in a couple decades. But we didn't go that way. We really talked about how do people get engaged, and how do they influence the acceleration of the climate in which all those things can proceed. But we are aware that we need to revisit some of these solutions that are of interest to people and aren't easy for people who aren't close to them to understand. So that's an important one. Right Lock Farm has done some things locally on that. but there's more that could be done. Thank you very much for bringing it up.
And also the farmers market has a program called Grow Local for the Planet, which has tons of people, including me and a few others, that dive into. 6 years I've gone to the Northeast Organic Farming Association conferences, and many others. And I'm helping nationally with the Farm Bill to shift more of the incentives to healthy ecosystems.
Terrific, thank you. Fritzi.
Thanks.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Ingrid and her team for the work you did on sort of gathering information about financial institutions. I know I was involved in a very casual conversation about credit cards. So having that information all in one place is really great. And I'm just curious if you guys, first of all, if you compiled all that so beautifully, and if you have plans for putting it somewhere that's really easily accessible, that people can find it really easily and we can direct friends and family to.
So thank you for that. So far the research, like the documents that were in today's presentation, are on banks, and the group is working on credit cards. We're not done with that yet. But important to know is that when you use a credit card, there's a bank behind it. So we know that, and we know what some of the bad banks are. And what we're trying to find out right now are what some great credit cards will be. Alan has been leading the subgroup of our little stop and steer, doing a lot of this work. So I might pass it over to him to answer the question of how we might best share the info with everyone.
Yeah, I could comment on that. It's not why I raised my hand. That's all right. Yeah, you know, it's
important aspects are excluded from the conversation.
It's a difficult issue. We found it's very complex. The more we got into it, the more complex it seemed. And so to give clear, positive recommendations was tricky. And although we were satisfied with our banking handout, we still probably will keep revising it as we discover more things. But so we're not really totally ready to widely distribute. I think we have distributed to 350 groups and some other friends and acquaintances. The same applies to the credit card work. And so that's not going to be a while before it's really, we feel like we're comfortable and we've slept on it and we want to share it widely. And after that, we want to get into investments and that issue and where can people most beneficially invest their money. What I did put my hand up for was in response to what Carol was talking about. Just if people have liked the Drawdown book, if they've looked at the Drawdown book and like it, the same organization has produced another book that is somewhat similar. So it's a bit redundant, perhaps. Can you see this okay? But it's like the Drawdown book, but it's really more focused on regeneration. And although it's got some of the format is sort of similar, where it has pictures and descriptions of different topics. So I bought that at Bookends, and it's a nice book.
Phil, Roseanne's got her hand up.
Thanks, Ingrid. Does 350 Metronorth have a Facebook group?
No, I don't think so.
So that might be something you guys might want to think about. So my generation and the younger generations below that is a fantastic way to share this kind of information that you guys are finding with respect to the banks and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we also haven't developed, I agree with you. And we also haven't developed an email list. So we don't have, hundreds of people we can email, but we have mainly ourselves and ourselves to blame.
Alan, don't we have a web page though?
No, well, the state website mentions and lists each local node, but there's not much additional information there. I should, since I've still got the floor and it's quiet, I should point out Valerie, who's always modest. If I can embarrass her, she was actually the person who started our 350 Metronorth node back in 2016. So as always, thanks, Valerie.
I would like to say that I might be able to take on that Facebook job, by the way.
Cool.
But I also, yeah. Just, I might be able to work on that.
It's funny, this is starting to look a little bit like a 315 Metronorth meeting. Where half the people here are in it.
Phil, I'm gonna have to take off unless somebody has a quick
Okay,
question.
we're about to leave. We have, actually, that's it. We're over. We do have 250 emails, email addresses now, thanks to Eventbrite. And they're all legible, which is unlike anything else we've ever done when people sign in. Thank you very much. Have a great week. And you've got to come for next week. Great speaker too. See you. Bye.
All right.
Goodbye, Bruce.